Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Jason Aaron's Thor, God of Thunder. And with this one, Gorr breaks down for Thor why their first encounter had caused Gorr to believe that this mission that he had started of going around and killing all these different gods needed to be cranked up to another level. So let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch your spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squat up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so in our last talk, we had left off with Thor leaving Omnipotent City, with him barely getting the information that he was looking for, which at the time was just the word Chronix. But with him getting there just in time to discover that Chronix is the Palace of Infinity and not a person, which he thought it was at first, but immediately after discovering this, Thor made his way there full speed, in order to find Gorr while he's still there. But within Chronix, where you have the time gods, who in this place use a drop of their blood to access the Pool of Forevers, and that is precisely why Gorr is here. But we come to find out that Gorr, he wants to take a long trip back in time. I'm talking billions of years. So instead of using a drop of blood, Gorr has his berserkers slaughter all these guys except for one, and he fills the Pool of Forevers with their blood for good measure. And Gorr even asks his last time god like if it's enough blood, and he's just like, well, you know, ain't nobody else left. And Gorr tells him if he needs to, he can just take one of dude's arms or his legs in order to make sure that this will work. And right then dude's just like, you know what, come to think of it, that is enough blood. But with Gorr preparing to make this trip, he lets the last time god know that if he doesn't come back, then his berserkers will tear this guy apart. And this last time god tells Gorr that he can't make any promises as far as what'll happen when Gorr steps through there. But with Gorr preparing to make this trip billions of years into the past, he's not at all concerned about what he'll find, because he's more certain about where he's going than even this last time god. Because at this point for Gorr, with all the years of experience that he has torturing and killing gods, he's learned more about their history than even the time gods were aware of. But for Gorr, as he steps into the Pool of Forevers, we come to find out that with what he's learned alongside with how he was raised, which will be our next talk on this playlist as far as the origin of Gorr. And with that one, I definitely want to talk about a lot of the new stuff that's been added, some of which we talked about before within Web of Venom Wraith, as well as throughout the course of Venom Volume 4, and definitely the other stuff with Null and King in Black, but we'll get to that soon. But with the knowledge that Gorr's accumulated about the gods and their history, this is part of what brought him to Chronix in order to access the Pool of Forevers, in order to go 14 billion years back in time, so that he can confront the first god who had birthed the universe. And with how this is done, in a way you kinda gotta just go with the story. Because aside from Jason Aaron, we've gotten a number of different deliveries of how the universe had began, and depending on who's your favorite writer, you might have expected something different. Whether it be celestials or different elder gods, Galactus, cosmic entities, or perhaps even other time travelers. But it's here where Jason Aaron chooses to bring this closer to Gorr, because his people believed that the universe was created by the first god, who looked around and saw that he was alone, and when he cried, his tears turned into oceans, oceans turned into ice, which later had formed into worlds. And he had been told this as a child like it was some grand and beautiful thing. But when Gorr gets here, instead it's very much what he had expected. Because when he arrives here in the void 14 billion years ago, he finds this first god creating life, but this god is not weeping. And instead of it being like a one-time god made man and boom, do your thing, this god had made countless mistakes. And with Gorr arriving here, he sees it all firsthand. But for Gorr, with him coming here to kill this first god and take his heart in order to move forward with his new plan, he's not worried the least about him killing this god causing any issues with life progressing after this point. Because he knows from what this god has already made, life will find a way. And eventually more creatures will slither from the ooze and they'll grow, evolve, and thrive. But then it's after this when we see Gorr make his way back to present day and back to Chronix, the Palace of Infinity, holding the heart of the first god, saying that now all he needs is a moon or two, some centuries to himself, the space in which to build, and a whole lot of slaves. But as soon as he gets back, a loud crack of thunder comes through, hitting Gorr and a number of his berserkers, because modern day Thor has made his way here. And right away Gorr can tell that Thor is more powerful than he was last time they met. But yet again, Gorr is not bothered. But in this moment, there's a few things that Gorr shares with Thor. Like for starters, he confirms Thor's suspicion about the berserkers being a part of Gorr, though at times some of the things that they do, the berserkers do on their own, like the attack on Omnipotent City. But even still, Gorr believes that subconsciously that they were doing what Gorr wanted, because ultimately this brought Thor to Gorr. And even though Gorr didn't intentionally send the berserkers to Omnipotent City, he did want Thor to eventually find him so that Thor can bear witness to the next phase of Gorr's plan. And Gorr starts off by letting Thor know that none of this would be possible without him, because over 1,000 years ago in that cave, when Thor believed that he had killed Gorr, Thor had actually opened Gorr's eyes. Because prior to this, Gorr had just been going around killing gods or just whoever he can find that was immortal, and after that he would just go back into the shadows. But it wasn't until after their encounter within the Cave of Horrors when Gorr built his army and he started using berserkers. But most notably for Gorr, it was in that cave when he had seen those Vikings that worshipped Thor happily lay down their lives to try to save Thor, knowing that they were most likely gonna die. And it was for Gorr, when he had seen this, he had realized that mortals' fear of a godless world is way stronger than their fear of their own death. And it sounds crazy, but it's a very true thing. Because for any mortal who lives a number of decades and then passes on, for them to have a god is for them to have hope. And if that god were to be removed, then all hope will be gone with them, which at that point would just leave the faith of all those mortals just waving in the wind, like a string that's lost its kite. So for Gorr, when he had seen that these guys were just ready to die for Thor, marching in that cave like, yeah, we gonna feast in Valhalla tonight. Like nobody's gonna make it. But for Gorr, with him seeing Thor's Vikings march to their death gladly, rather than being in fear for their lives, which usually is the strongest fear of most mortals. And by the way, for Gorr, this isn't the first time that he'd seen mortals give their lives for their gods, but with the way that these Vikings gave up their lives with such wicked glee, this showed Gorr that he had to move what he was doing to a much bigger scale, because much like Thor's Vikings who called themselves berserkers, Gorr was raised under a similar teaching, because he was taught as a kid that the stars are the eyes of the ancestors, so if a good person dies, they get turned into the stars, but if a bad person dies, they just get burnt in the sun, which really is similar to just about any religious teaching. If you do good, you're rewarded by your god or gods, and if you do bad, you're punished by them. And for Gorr, he had come to the realization that all these different faiths, and especially in the case of those Vikings who had believed in Thor so fervently, but in either case, these faiths were established on top of fear, whether it was his people fearing to die and be burnt in judgment, or if it was Thor's Vikings fearing to lose their god, and fearing that more than their own deaths. And for Gorr, this elevated his motive, which initially he had just thought, okay, there are two types of gods, some that do bad and some that do nothing. But ever since that moment in that cave, Gorr had realized that all gods all across time, from the first all the way to the last, they all gotta go, because that's the only way that all mortals can truly be free. And it's here just after the last time god sets the Pool of Forevers to the time that Gorr requested, and when he does, he tells Gorr like, man, I did everything you said you was gonna let me go. And Gorr is just like, you know, more or less, nope. I said you wouldn't have to watch to the end. And Gorr kills the last time god, leaving him to watch nothing ever again, except for the back of his eyelids. But as Gorr steps back into the Pool of Forevers, leaving Thor here restrained by the Black Berserkers, and Gorr makes his way in to the time of which he designated to continue his plan, of which he said it's going to take centuries to do, but seconds after he goes in, Thor breaks himself free and he goes into the Pool of Forevers, following Gorr just seconds after Gorr had passed through. And it's from here where we then jump far into the future, in Asgard, where we have previously seen old King Thor. And when we catch up with him here, he is just getting wrecked by these Black Berserkers. And for old King Thor, after all these years, after all this time, he's had enough. And when we find him in this moment, he's practically begging for death, like he's done. But then at a moment's notice, modern day Thor arrives, right after following Gorr through the Pool of Forevers. And of course, with him getting here, modern day Thor, he's like, where's Gorr, the God Butcher? But also with him seeing his older self, modern Thor believes that this is Odin here. But old King Thor corrects him rather quickly, and he tells his younger self to get to swinging because they really ain't got time to just stand around and talk. But not long after modern day Thor gets here, the Black Berserkers, they then begin to fall back, with Gorr calling them back at this point, and old King Thor is happy to see it with his good eye. But modern day Thor, he's pumped because he was just fighting Gorr seconds ago, just before he dove in after Gorr in the Pool of Forevers. And when he comes here, he asks old King Thor where's Gorr, because again, he was right behind him. But then King Thor lets him know, like, sure, you landed in the same spot that Gorr arrived in, but Gorr got here 900 years ago, and a whole lot has happened since he got here. And this we see as we follow the Black Berserkers as they make their way back to Gorr, who at this time, 900 years after his arrival, he's made much progress in constructing his solution to get rid of all gods throughout all time, with his plan that is almost complete now, ushering in a new age of freedom. And that's something we'll dive deeper into once we get into God Bomb, which we'll be covering just after we get into the origin of Gorr. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below so you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.